Hi everyone, and welcome to the Unit 3 Part 2 video presentation for EDSE 673. So in the previous presentation we discussed the value of self-reflection, and we looked over two different assignments that will be submitted for Unit 3. In this presentation we'll be working through several different topics related to research and evidence-based practice. We know that evidence-based practice is very important, particularly in this course. We're looking at that, but we want to understand where does the research come from. So we'll look a little bit at design and how we select the right practices from the right research studies to make decisions, both for instruction and for programming. We'll also go through the What Works websites, and we'll have information on those here. Discuss an assignment related to the What Works websites. We'll talk about meta-analysis and the way that it helps us to answer questions and to make decisions for instruction and programming. We'll discuss action research, and this is particularly related to one of the major assignments for this course. And finally, we'll do a review of advanced methods for research to identify other ways of finding evidence-based strategies. So as a review, taking a look here at empirical observation, this is a major part of research and what makes it valuable to us. Aristotle shared the idea of to learn, the value of looking around us. And Plato took a look at faith versus reason. So even back in these times, with philosophy and the development of current schools of thought, particularly in education or in learning or in instruction, even Aristotle and Plato were talking about how can we find things that we know are true. Rather than having faith in a practice, we need reason to identify the value of that practice. And as Aristotle said, to learn, we must look around us. And this truly is the foundation of research. Research is scientific observation to provide us with understanding, control, and prediction. And this is truly the foundation of evidence-based practices, which we then would implement practices and interventions based on that evidence within our settings. So, scientific observation is productive for teaching, learning, and outcomes for students or clients. We're going to talk through several different kinds of research, particularly the development of research looking at randomized design. Subjects are selected randomly. We've got very large samples to represent all conditions or populations. So a study using this kind of research might be nationwide, and that's why randomized design research is often considered a gold standard. Taking a look at significance, particularly, we've got schools across the country, some being urban and some being suburban and some being rural, and some being, in a higher income or higher socioeconomic status and others in lower. So really capturing what's going on across the nation, representing these different conditions or populations, and maybe looking at an intervention within those schools or within those settings or programs. And as you're familiar, I'm sure, from statistics courses, this incorporates the idea of testing for significance. We're always looking for a statistically significant impact of an intervention or a practice or a program on achievement, on learning, or on growth for students or clients. And that's how we can reach a conclusion. So particularly Fisher, you may be familiar with Fisher. Here he is, 1890 to 1962, and he was a major player in the development of the idea of statistical significance, which is really the foundational concept of this idea of gold standard research. So the statistical significance mindset is fairly conservative because we're starting off with that null hypothesis. And you'll recall from statistics courses that the null hypothesis always states there is no statistically significant difference. For instance, if we're taking a look at a group of students or clients and we're implementing an intervention to reduce physically aggressive behavior and replace it with a more appropriate replacement behavior, our null hypothesis for the intervention would be that there is no statistically significant difference for students who have experienced this intervention or program in episodes of aggressive behavior. The alternate, or otherwise known as the research hypothesis, would state that there is a statistically significant difference, and we hope that it would be an improvement and in more frequent use of the replacement behavior. That alternate or research hypothesis, if it is confirmed, then indicates that the intervention is effective based on the parameters set by the researcher. As a little refresher, again, you probably recall this p-value concept from your statistics coursework, but we're always looking at a threshold to test when we're doing this gold standard research based in the idea of statistical significance. So a p-value is something that we'll calculate to determine the likelihood that the results that we see in the population that has experienced the intervention are due to chance as opposed to due to an effect of the intervention. So if we calculate all of our results here and we get a p-value that is less than 0.05, we will reject that null hypothesis and we will say, in fact, we do see a statistically significant difference for clients or students who have received this intervention program or have received this particular teaching strategy. And then the common language that we might use is that there is a statistically significant difference here. As we just said, it's unlikely due to chance. We think that the intervention is working. That's what we want to say here. And reject that null hypothesis. The null hypothesis, again, saying there is no statistically significant difference for people who have received this intervention. And that's if we have this low p-value. The lower the p-value, the better, because the lower the p-value, the less likely it is that the difference is due to due to chance, and that rather it is a result of statistical significance, the value of the intervention for the clients or students. If we have a p-value calculated after we gather all of our data that is higher than 0.05, we must accept the null hypothesis based on the idea of this gold standard research, and then we would state, with this conventional test threshold, that is, that the difference between the populations, if there is one, is not significant, or that the difference is due to chance. And that is the foundation of significance testing associated with the gold standard research, and Fisher was significantly contributing to that research design. However, it's important for us as researchers and practitioners to take into consideration the fact that there are limitations to this supposed gold standard research. It's very important that we remember that. For instance, in a famous study evaluating the effectiveness of a prescription drug from Tennessee to California, so pretty far across the nation there, we're looking at results indicating that a drug was safe for people to use and consume, and that was at the 0.05 or lower level of significance. So the interpretation of that result would indicate that the chances of the drug being okay, quote unquote, or safe to use are 95%. It's 95% sure, or more, 96, 97, we are sure that you're going to be fine when you use this drug and that you won't have any negative results or any significant side effects. But then a small percentage of the people were passing away because of the drug. So this example here, it's important to take into consideration that 5% is not always good enough. The stakes may be high. So just because our significance level is set at 0.05 does not mean that we're home free. We really need to consider with this gold standard research, what kind of chance or what kind of error are we willing to accept, and what are the stakes? For instance, if people's lives or their health or their well-being and safety, if these things are, up for consideration with this treatment or program, is 5% good enough? Another example, a study in Tennessee indicating that small class sizes are significantly beneficial, that students do much better, statistically significantly better, when they're in a small class, and the study would identify exactly what that class size is. California then spending a great deal of money wanting to implement these same class sizes, eager to see the positive results, but did not have them. Thus, we must be cautious when evaluating research and trying to transfer it or generalize the results and the interventions to our settings. What might have been the differences or the lurking extraneous variables? What other factors might have been in play in Tennessee that caused the small class sizes to be helpful to students when the results did not turn out that way in California. One issue that was identified upon examination of this situation was that teacher quality or the qualifications for teachers actually differed from California to Tennessee. So in these particular situations, the teachers in Tennessee were more highly trained or more prepared for the role or for the population than those in California. So at that time, it causes the researcher to stop and say, okay, we identified statistical significance for these small class sizes, but it did not transfer to California. So what factors might be affecting the students in California, or what other factors might be positively affecting the students in Tennessee? We wish it were this simple and that we could transfer results from here to there and everywhere. But unfortunately, this is not the case. Research can be a lot more complex, a lot more murky than this. So it's very important that we are cautious and consider all of the variables when we are taking interventions and implementing interventions, as the stakes are high when it comes to student or client achievement, well-being, safety, and of course, funding that goes into any of these programs or interventions. So the ultimate question as we're reviewing these examples is, can I apply the evidence-based results that worked in one situation and expect those same results in another? For instance, will what worked in Tennessee work in California? And the answer is not always. It's important for us to keep this in mind as a limitation of the gold standard for research, that's significance testing. A little more information regarding these limitations of the gold standard. You may encounter what we like to call the washing out effect. So if there are enough schools, enough students, enough samples, enough clients, and the curriculum or the intervention is highly controlled, the participants in the study are well trained, the variation that may have occurred, so the differences that you may have seen, can be washed out. Basically, there's so much control over a particular setting where the intervention is taking place that things turn out to settle in such a way we don't see the differences that we would have seen. So it's maybe too controlled. Keep in mind that 0.05, that p-value that we set, includes real people. So even if there are 5% of people or a small number of people for whom the intervention is unhelpful or even makes things worse, we must take into consideration that our stakes are high, because we're not working with substances or in some other situation with lower stakes. We're working with human beings. Keep this in mind. Is 5% good enough? That's the question that we keep returning to. Take a look at comparability of context. Once again, this is state to state, district to district, program to program, and the ecological variability. What factors could affect your setting, your center, your program, your school that are not affecting the setting in which the research is taking place? Or what factors may they have that you do not experience? Is the place where the study is being conducted like, quote unquote, the real world? Or is it more controlled than anything you would ever encounter in your setting? So you want to consider teachers or practitioners, the methods, the administration and leadership in place, the training, the curriculum that's being used. Are these anything like what you encounter in your real life and in your setting? And then finally, there is an absence of enough gold standard research in many different areas and interventions. There are more single subject design studies. You might see case studies, qualitative studies, but we don't necessarily have the data that we need to ensure that all of this is being put into place and evaluated effectively. So that could be another limitation. There are several solutions that we can look into as we're trying to deal with these limitations, which we've talked about on the past 2 slides. And those solutions may be to look for something called effect size. It's very important to review effect size, looking at, regardless of the p-value, what was the actual effect. So this value may be included in research, but is not always. For instance, is the effect size 0.8 or above? That would be considered a big or significant effect size. 0.5 would be a moderate example, and 0.3 would be a weak effect size. So always take a look when you're reading about an evidence-based practice in a study or an article. Look for effect size. You can also try it out with a pilot study, see if it makes a difference in one area or setting, and always deliberating, balancing, and weighing the evidence to identify the best choice for your setting, which may not be the best choice for every setting. We'll move into part 2.